Dear brothers and sisters, this meditation is on Mark chapter 2 from verse 23 to chapter 3 verse 12. I must admit that I expected this talk to become rather boring. The biggest part of today's reading is about Jesus and the Sabbath, and I always saw this passage as Jesus reacting to the legalism of the Sabbath practices and setting it straight, nothing more. It appears that the Sabbath had become one big set of rules, and now Jesus is reacting on that. Nothing special, I thought at first. However, when I started thinking, reading, and doing studies about what was actually the whole aim of the Sabbath, I was quite surprised and very happy because I learned a great deal today. So let us take a look at how it all began. We may read about the origins of the Sabbath in Genesis with the creation. God created heaven and earth in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th day. And each day of creation was marked with the note, and it was evening, and it was morning, the first day. And it was evening, and it was morning, the 2nd day, etc. But not for the 7th day. It seems as if there is no end of this rest, and the first humans lived in this rest, enjoying creation in all beauty and holiness in the Garden of Eden. But then, as things go wrong, the humans are expelled from the garden, and so from God's rest. And then, centuries later, the Lord gives to his people things that are signs of his kingdom to come. The greatest example is the tabernacle, I think, and the temple, which is full of beauty, and is the holiest place, which is reminding of Eden and pointing forward to God's kingdom to come, in a time where heaven and earth will come together and God's kingship is acknowledged. And the same can be said about the Sabbath. Let me quote directly from N.T. Wright. He says, "The Sabbath was to time what the temple was to place." It's beautiful. The Sabbath was to time what the temple was to place. So the temple was the place where already a bit of the time to come was experienced, where heaven and earth come together. And now the Sabbath was the time when already a bit of the time to come was experienced, where we live in rest and joy in God's kingdom. And so as the temple was a signpost to the true temple, God incarnate, indeed, Christ, so the Sabbath was a signpost to the time where it is all fulfilled and we can enjoy rest and joy in Christ. As he said himself in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus is our true rest. So with this in the back of our mind, let us go back to our text, so that we can see how Jesus' doing is far from boring, but rather as amazing as always. So on the Sabbath, Jesus was walking with his disciples through some grain fields, and his disciples were picking some ears to eat. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Adam and Eve were also enjoying creation in the garden. But the Pharisees comment on it, and then Jesus tells them that David himself ate from the consecrated bread, which was not lawful. And now that Jesus is referring to this passage is actually really interesting, as Tim Mackey points out. So David was fleeing Saul, who was still Israel's king, regardless that he was rejected by God. And now the true anointed king was David, but he was not recognized by the people, and he ate from the bread. And so Jesus is the unrecognized king of creation walking on earth. For sure he cannot be rebuked. And then he says, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." The Sabbath was made to point forward to Christ, and not the other way around. And we may enter that rest each and every moment as we come to Christ in prayer. He invites us to come, for he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Amen.